All right, it's my time again. Somebody said to me this morning, your routine. Well, I like this setting. As you can see, I'm still in that same Chinese church. Now, I've titled today's little devotional as This is the Place. You know, for centuries, the early Christians did not have a place. They did not build a church. And they met wherever they could, according to the book of Acts, by the rivers, by under a tree, in lecture halls, in synagogues, any place that would welcome them where they could worship God. They would do that because the only thing that mattered to them is being able to worship God. But as the centuries passed, it became obvious to them that they needed a place. And so they began to construct churches, kind of like the one that you see here. Now, some of those churches would become classics in time and become cathedrals. As you can see, this church is a fairly good-sized church. But the most important change is that the church became the place, the go-to place. This is the place where Christians would be christened when they are born, where they would be baptized when they accept Jesus, and even where memorials and wakes would be held at the point of death. The church as a place, the church as a building, became central to Christian life. You know, at the time of Jesus, things like funerals and weddings and births, these were social occasions. And for those early Christians, for a few centuries, they were early occasions. They were not the time when you have to go to a church. Most Christians today find it hard to do a wedding if it's not a church wedding. So we would even make a differentiation. Are you having a church wedding? And of course, when a person dies who is a member of the church, we would have a special memorial. And having been a minister for part of my career, I've spent enough time with both occasions, conducting weddings, conducting funerals as well. The church building became so central to Christianity that it was seen as almost a staircase to heaven. And somehow Christians convinced themselves if they did not go to church, if they did not appear at their place, they couldn't really worship God. They couldn't really connect with God. Now, I think in recent times we have sort of woken up from this concept a little bit to realize that we can meet God elsewhere. We are, in a way, relearning what the early Christians did. And yet, because churches have been a part of our consciousness for nearly 2,000 years as Christians, it is still the place of God. You know, when God asked Moses to make a sanctuary for the Israelites, the reason was to give them a place where they can see as the place of God, that I may live among them. And so even in Bible times, that special place, be it the tabernacle or later on the temple, they became the focal point, not just of faith, but of life itself. Think about how frequently the Jews, say at the time of Jesus, had to visit the temple because there's some festival there, a Passover, a Sukkot, or whatever. Next week is Passover week for the Jews. And, you know, they don't have a temple these days, but that memory is part of the Jewish consciousness. Church will always be part of Christian consciousness. I can still remember the church bells, the little crosses that hung in every church, that rung every Sunday or every Sabbath, regardless for year. Since I grew up in a more or less Christian part of India, that was part of the memory of life. The youngest age memories, the ones that apparently last the longest in our brains. And so we still see the church building as the place of God. Unfortunately, most modern churches are really empty 6 days of the week. Nothing is happening there. We utilize them on Sabbath, maybe Sundays for some special occasions, and in some countries, churches even rent their premises out just to make a little extra money for the maintenance of the building, while we do very little with it. I have seen churches that are so dilapidated that you wonder why would anybody go and worship in that place. And yet, even in such places, with such churches, the members still see that as God's place. This is where I should go. Now, I think what is more important in life is to carry God in our heart, to carry Him with us so He is there in every place we find ourselves in. God does occupy space. He says, I live in a high and holy place, but also in the heart of the meek and the lowly. So God is everywhere in the manner of speaking. What is more important is for us to realize that fact, that we don't have to be in a church in order to worship God. We don't have to be in a church building in order to connect with God. This is a wonderful place to remind us of that reality, and maybe once in a while coming together in some fancy church building helps to enhance that feeling, that emotion that we may have. But we need to carry it with us everywhere, whether we are inside a church building or outside of it, whether we are in a marketplace or in our houses, whether we are in a workplace, an office, a school, or open field, that God is there. He is a God of space, not just special spaces, but all spaces. And that's where we will find Him. And so on this Sabbath, having spent some time in a beautiful church building, I wish you Sabbath blessing, the peace and the rest of the Sabbath, knowing that this God who had worshipped with us in this church this morning has worshipped with all of His people in every church throughout the world, and is with you, is with me in every place that we go to. God bless. Have a good week ahead.